Okay, all flight controllers. Retro.
Go.
Vital. Go. Guidance.
Go.
Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon.
Copy.
Go. Capcom. We're go.
Go for
We're
launch.
go. Bring high. We're
20
go.
seconds and counting.
2,000 feet. 2,000 feet.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Space, the final frontier.
Nichelle Nichols just absolutely fantastic.
One of my reasons for going to Remaking was to see Nichelle.
Because let's face it, a woman with a title in charge is pretty cool.
That's the thing. That's what's so great about Lieutenant Uhura. She was my favorite character on the show.
When you meet Nichelle, it's like meeting a queen. Still gorgeous, still has so much presence. And her line was longer than mine. I was like, okay, Nichelle.
For most of the world, you know, Nichelle Nichols is Lieutenant Uhura, pop culture icon. But what they don't know is that she changed the space program forever.
We owe a great debt of gratitude to Nichelle Nichols, not just through her acting, but it was what she personally chose to do.
I loved Uhura on Star Trek, but I wasn't aware of everything that she did off the screen.
I think it's one of the most fantastic stories to be told to the American people.
Well, thanks for being you, number one. We'd love to hear how you went from Star Trek to NASA and the things you did with it.
I guess it's sort of like going from fantasy to fact and then wondering which is the fantasy and which is the fact. So this gets sort of schizophrenic, you see.
We're about to shoot, okay? I'm from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised. I love Chicago. It's more than a Midwestern town. It's like a New York moved to the Midwest.
Nichelle was born before World War II, before Jackie Robinson, before the armed forces were integrated, a time of great segregation in America.
My father is Samuel Earl Nichols, and he was from a well-to-do family. And my mother was not going to marry my father because we're not of the same class. And my father was determined to marry my mother. And thank God he did, because together they had 6 children, and I'm one. And I was my father's pet, so nobody would ever not know who my father was, because he was always saying, this is my daughter, she's going to grow up to be a star. I took ballet from the time I was a young girl. I was determined to be the first black ballerina. The class that I went to, I think I was the only African American in the class.
I grew up believing that I could become anything I wanted to be.
Of course, my father told me that from the time I was a child. And my mother used to say, Samuel, please don't put those ideas in that child's brain. And he said, she's going to be what she's going to be. And he said, remember when they told you, Leisha, don't marry Samuel Nichols?
Most people don't know that she started out as a dancer and a singer.
I love musical theater. So dance was now just a component of singing, dancing, acting. And I discovered that I had this very strange voice because I could sing high soprano, and I had this nice low voice. And I could sing down here moaning low. I had my first professional job when I was 14 years old in Chicago at the downtown at the Sherman House. When all of the great talent came, they played the Sherman House. It was the only hotel that allowed black people to come and stay. I was fortunate and honored to meet so many great performers then. Without question, however, the highlight was meeting the great Duke Ellington. He was performing at the Chicago Theater and asked the publicist to find me.
And he was looking for someone like me, evidently, but older. So I got older. He gulped, looked me straight in the face and said, well, that's just about the range we're looking for.
He wanted me to perform a ballet to one of his suites. So I got 2 guys, and we did this fantastic ballet. Every night I used to go stand in the curtain just before I went on and watch this tall, willowy gal who was the band singer sing, and the way she wrapped herself around the microphone. And I was just in awe. Toward the end of the tour, which was about 3 months, Mr. Ellington called me to his dressing room, and he said, sing something for me. And I looked at him and I said, sing what? And he said, well, you can sing, can't you? He said, you've still got that little gold dress that you wore before we left. And I said, oh, yes, I've even got the gold shoes. And he said, great, you go on tonight. I said, do what? And he says, the singer is sick. She had to leave the band. She's not going to finish the tour. You are. I've never been so scared in my life, but I was determined to never show it. And so I went on, and I
would get wonderful applause, but I noticed that the band was kind of going, and Duke Ellington is actually playing piano for me. His back is kind of sideways to the audience, and he tried not to show it. He finally comes to me, he said, "What are you doing with that microphone?" And I said, "I'm singing." He said, "The last gal who did that was twice as tall as you, and the only reason she hung onto that mic is because she would have fallen down." He says, "You don't need to hug the mic and do all of those gyrations. You've got a voice. Now just sing, do your thing." And that's when I first learned not to be like anybody else, to be yourself. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened. I was booked in Hawaii, and I was so excited. But at that time, you couldn't fly from Chicago to Hawaii. You had to come to Los Angeles. And that changed my life. While I went to Hawaii and loved Hawaii, I couldn't wait to get back to California. I thought it was the most beautiful place. I wound up, of course, moving to Los Angeles. I found acting was something that I loved and wanted to do and began to excel at.
Gene Roddenberry had a TV show called The Lieutenant, and he did an episode that centered on race that Nichelle was actually in.
The Lieutenant was my first role on television, and it was a wonderful role.
Hey, guess what? Found a job already.
Not accounting?
It's not that easy.
I was so new to the business that when the director told me to step into my key light, I didn't know where to turn.
But I thought after a few years, a person would start to grow a little.
Working in television was not that pleasurable for me. It's a wonderful medium, but it really throws a theater actor, performer, at first.
We were shooting at night, and this person kept hovering over me. And I said, "Look, you." And then I noticed that this guy was smoking with his cigarette between his finger. And I'd only seen one other person do that. And I turned around and I said, "Look, you." "Mr. Roddenberry." It was this one.
I became essentially who I became through Gene Roddenberry. He, I guess you could say, discovered me. It was meant to be. And we knew that from day one, because he talked exactly like my father.
Because that episode centered on race was so controversial, they didn't actually air it. That so aggravated Gene Roddenberry that he decided he would figure out how to tell those types of stories in a different way.
On several occasions, Gene remarked, "I've got something in mind that I think is going to come about, and if it does, there'll be something important in it for you."
I always knew that where he was going to be fresh and new and exciting, but enlightening. He was brilliant in that way. He loved to talk politics with me. We talked and talked and talked. I remember him talking about something that had people of all races. And I said, "Cool, that's what, let me know, that's what I'm talking about,
I just finished a marvelous engagement in London and gone on to Paris when a couple of telegrams found me. "Come home immediately," my agent had wired. "They're doing Star Trek." Star what? I wondered. When I went to read for the part, it was very funny. They had not written Uhura. She was not named.
They said, would you be so kind as to read the role of Spock? I said, well, tell me something about this character. What is she like? And they stopped and looked at me.
And so the director said, no, you won't be playing Spock. Spock is a man.
Could it be a woman? And they said, yes, but Leonard Nimoy would not like it.
And I said, fine, but tell me about Spock, because you can't tell me about the female communications officer because you haven't created her yet.
And they looked at me like, like the dog looks at you. Ever seen a little dog, you talk to him, he goes. Next thing I know, I'm reading for it, and I get to the bottom of the page. Finally, Joe Sargent, who was the director, said, come on, Vic Talent, let's go to lunch. You had it when you walked in the door. I had a big book when I came in. It was called Uhuru. And Uhuru is Swahili for freedom. Gene asked to see me, and he said, I really like the book you brought in, but what I really am interested in is the name, Uhuru. He says, I want to do something with it that involves you. I said, well, why don't you do an alliteration of it and soften the end with an A, and it'll be Uhura. And I named the character.
Gene Roddenberry was an enormously gifted storyteller. He used science fiction as a metaphor for the realities of the time.
That was one of the core things that Gene Roddenberry wanted to have in the show, was more diversity, more cooperation, a positive, exciting view of the future.
My father looked at life, I think, the way we should all look at life, which is to embrace the diversity, whether it's in physical feature and form or thought, idea.
The concept of Star Trek is quite extraordinary and unprecedented. I can't think of anything that has had that kind of lifespan.
The fact that it was set in a distant time and place gave it access to the present in a way storytelling of the present would not.
It was one of the first mainstream science fiction shows that really dealt with the issues that we were dealing with at the time.
Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Look at me. I am black on the right side. Loci is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side.
When I started watching Star Trek was right at the beginning. Show one, year one, I saw it, and I watched every episode.
I couldn't believe the diversity that was on the bridge at the time.
North America represented by the captain, Europe represented by a Scottish engineer, Asia represented by my character. But we also saw another part of the world that rarely gets represented in that kind of mix, Africa, represented by an African woman.
Nichelle, at that time, was one of the faces that we had to see.
The world got to see that, like, our women are strong. Yes, but they're also smart.
She was the best person for that job, and it didn't matter if she was male or female.
Progress report.
Mr. Spock, I haven't done anything like this in years. If it isn't done just right, I could build the entire communications system. It's very delicate work, sir.
I can think of no one better equipped to handle it, Miss Uhura.
Do you have a favorite episode of Star Trek?
Any time Uhura got to get off the bridge.
I submitted several episodes, and they bought one for the second season. The great part about it was that I got to meet Nichelle before I got to script, and she was wearing that incredible two-piece bikini outfit from Mirror Mirror episode. So I got to see much more of Nichelle than I ever expected to. My God, that woman was the most beautiful woman I had ever been in the presence of. And, you know, here's this awkward, geeky kid still in college and very nerdy, and I come into the presence of this incredibly beautiful, talented woman, and I was just heart-stopping, speechless.
Nichelle Nichols had that effect on people.
Personally, when I saw Nichelle on the show, I could date a woman like that.
Lieutenant Uhura, I was in love with. She was a knockout.
Actresses for 2000.
In the 1968 episode Plato's Stepchildren, she went where few women had gone before. One of TV's first interracial kisses. Margie.
Who is Nichelle Nichols?
Yes.
That was still a time in television where contact between people of different races and different sexes was very controversial. TV affiliates in the southern states would react.
They were stuck in that mind frame that minorities had to be in the subservient position.
This was a challenging time for people of color trying to make their way in film and television. There weren't a lot of roles.
Uhura was a new kind of television woman, yet it was becoming uncomfortably obvious that whatever ambitious plans Jean had for my character, Uhura's role was constantly being diminished. Even in the enlightened 23rd century of Jean's imagination, a strong, independent black woman was not welcome.
To me, it seemed there were always female roles, but roles were male roles, and then there were the female roles. Well, this was not a female role, and I refused to treat it that way. We're not just fancy little or tough broads, you know. We're human beings, and we come in all forms. Directors tried to even change me, make me more feminine.
You weren't having it.
With Uhura.
I tried often to write scenes for her. Usually I tried to make them emotional, personal kinds of scenes where there was some conflict going on that the women had to resolve or that they were strongly involved in.
There were marvelous scripts. And so you'd get it and you'd see this wonderful script that involves you so well. And then you'd get the revisions. Mm-hmm. And then you'd get the pink revisions. And then you'd get the orchid revisions. Mm-hmm. And then you're down to...
Hailing frequencies open, sir. Hailing frequencies open, sir. Hailing frequencies, sir. Hailing frequencies. Hailing frequencies. Hailing frequencies open, sir. Hailing frequencies open, sir.
Lieutenant Uhura.
Hailing frequency still open, sir.
And there's a legendary story about one day Nichelle turns to the camera and says, if I have to say open hailing frequencies one more time, I'm going to blow up this console. She was so frustrated with not getting to do more.
Uhura, your last subspace log contained an error in the frequencies column.
Mr. Spock, sometimes I think if I hear that word frequency once more, I'll cry.
The unfortunate part of it is that her role seems to have been diminished because she was a black woman. And that character was viewed as perhaps more expendable than the other characters.
I told them they were doing that. And they said, oh, no, this has nothing to do with you. And I said, you're not me. It has everything to do with me.
She was told that she was going to be more significant to the show than she was. You know, we were the movable furniture to a great degree.
She's the chief communications officer, and she can't talk? What good is she? And I said, that's what they want to do with the character I want out.
I didn't have all this wonderful thought process going before. I got a job. You know, I was an actress, got a job right on, you know.
I thought my career would be in musical theater until Star Trek interrupted my career. And that's the way I looked at it.
And I'll have other opportunities to grow in with my talents, you know, of singing and dancing, and I'll go to Broadway and I'll do big pictures and that kind of thing. Well, a funny thing happened on the way there.
An NAACP event that was being held, organizers of the event were trying to get her to meet this fan, and she said, wait a minute, I don't want to meet fans right this minute.
This person came up to me and said he needed to talk to me. And I said, I'm sorry, and I turned around and was looking in the face of Dr. Martin Luther King.
And what's typical about Nichelle when she meets celebrities of all types, they want to tell her about how she affected their life. Dr. King was telling her Star Trek is the only show that he lets his children watch.
It was always a wonderful experience because Dad did not have a lot of time to actually watch anything with us because he was so engaged in civil and human rights campaigns and the struggle. But I guess in retrospect it was important to him, but it certainly was important to us to have time with our dad.
She then says to him, I'm so glad you feel this way, and I'll be going off into another career move. And he's stunned. He says, what do you mean? He said, well, I just turned in my resignation. Dr. King says, no, you can't. You can't leave.
And my first thought was what you told my Dr. Martin Luther King. He's going to tell me how to run my life now.
She says, well, the work I'm doing is, I'm just delivering a line or two in each show. I'm really not using my craft to any great extent.
He said, you don't understand the effect that you are having, not only on Black people, not only on young women, but on everybody. Everybody's mind and attitude is changed immeasurably simply because you are there.
Lieutenant Uhura was the most important person on the bridge because she was the only one who could say, Captain, and everybody would stop what they were doing and turn around to hear what she was going to say next.
But also because she appealed to us by making us understand that we were going to be present in whatever future was being imagined.
I was a little boy at that time, and it was at a time where my mother was from the South, I was from the North. They could just barely get to the front of the bus then. And that's what Dr. King was saying, because he could see where it was going.
You're looked up to, and you're a role model. And people aspire to be you, that person that they see on television. So don't leave, don't go away. You stay right where you are. He was a man of such wisdom. And when he made a statement like that, he had a good reason for doing it.
It was the first time that I really talked to anyone important about what was going on. It was equally as important as anything I could possibly have done. So I stayed, and I never regretted. Uhura and I became friends. It was the character that I had the blessing to create and never failed me. And the show only went 2 more seasons. And then we were gone.
In show business, everything ends sooner or later. You learn to say goodbye and look to the future. After all, you never know what's around the corner.
How did they sort of notify you your introduction to NASA?
Well, again, Star Trek had a little bit to do with that.
The response to it going off the air was unbelievable.
Rumors that it was going off the air brought more than 1 million letters of outraged fan mail to NBC.
The universe it created was self-consistent, imaginative, and makes its viewers long to be part of it. And they didn't want to see it come to an end.
Some of the most incredible people on the planet are Star Trek fans.
Fans started holding Star Trek conventions.
Oh, I am a Denevian slime devil.
I'm Ambassador X from Ecosystem 4. I think it's the extreme logic of the characters.
I was one of the fans waiting in line for an autograph or a photo or something. If you were a science and a science fiction geek and Star Trek person, this was where you wanted to be.
It's just the happiest day of my entire life. It's just so beautiful. Can't help it.
But in '75, I was invited to go to Chicago to what turned out to be the largest Star Trek convention ever.
By the '75 convention, it was a full-fledged movement.
It was also the first time that NASA had seen fit to allow one of their scientists to come as a speaker. The day before the convention was to begin, we held a press conference. I noticed a tall, handsome, white-haired gentleman on our panel. I discovered he was Dr. Jesko von Puttkamer, NASA's Director of Science. And the press asked this scientist, Dr. von Puttkamer, I mean, this is fantasy, and what's a man of your stature doing here? So Dr. von Puttkamer said, and he's this tall man with a shock of white hair and mustache, you know, and he looks down the way and he says, well, I tell you, aside from the dream that Gene Roddenberry had that put all humankind in the future, I came for something more important than that. He said, I came because I had to find out if Lieutenant Uhura had the most beautiful legs that I think she has on the screen. And of course, the press sat there and looked at him, and we all on the panel are going, what did he say? What did he say? I said, what did he say about her? And I was cinched. I said, I've got to meet that person.
Jesko von Puttkamer was a charismatic advocate for spaceflight and a wonderful voice for what NASA was doing.
When he and Nichelle first got together, I think that was a kind of a natural partnership, a mentorship and a partnership.
I sat through Dr. von Puttkamer's presentation in utter awe. I saw all of this wondrousness. I remember something happening back then saying, humankind stepped on the moon. It wasn't just Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. I stepped on the moon. And I sat there thrilled and impressed as I watched the presentation of where we had gone as human beings. And I didn't see me. And out of that awe and out of that thrill came a feeling of disenfranchisement. I did not see myself in the present space program. I didn't see myself as a black, and I didn't see myself as a woman. Here I was involved in projecting a future of what our space program where it could take us, and I wanted to be there, not in fantasy, not 300 years from today, but now.
Oh, I dreamed of becoming an astronaut, but NASA said that women weren't being considered for the job.
The Russians already had women in space. When is America going to put a woman in space? When is America going to put a black person in space?
The argument was made by the National Institute of Sciences in the mid-'70s that there were no qualified black people.
I resented that and decided I was going to do something about it.
I started writing about it. And they got printed in Ebony, and they got printed in various magazines and newspapers. And suddenly, media, the press, wanted to interview me because, as you have probably noticed, I have a lot to say. In early 1977, I was appointed to the board of directors of the National Space Institute. That January, I gave a speech before NSI's annual Joint Board Council meeting. I was talking before 2,000 or 3,000 people, it felt like, but it was a huge audience.
She looked out in the audience, and there were very few women and probably no people of color.
There were scientists there, there were NASA officials there, and the call went out.
I challenged everyone to answer the question, space, what's in it for me? And I was not talking about becoming an astronaut. I was talking about, if those guys are doing it, then we're supposed to be there. Then where are we?
And she's saying, where are my people?
Where are my people? And I meant that then, and I mean it now.
That was the spark that caused NASA to say, okay, you got a good point. How do we go about this?
Well, coming out of that, I was invited to Washington to meet the administrator of NASA.
He said, we were in the audience listening to you, so was the director.
Suddenly I'm at NASA headquarters, and I'm seeing women and men in every level, from administration and management. I was fascinated, and I said to them, why doesn't your public know this?
NASA was in a huge period of transition.
As the last Apollo crew worked on the moon, the engineers on Earth prepared for tomorrow's day in space.
They had already done the Skylab missions. Apollo Soyuz flew in 1975, and then the Apollo mission was over. The country was engaged in a lot of economic dislocation. You had a lot of people that were downsized after the Apollo program. Now they were entering the shuttle era, and we need talent.
I have a model here of the space shuttle.
In the 1970s, NASA needed to recruit a new class of astronauts for the space shuttle program. And this would be a very different class than had been previously recruited.
The astronaut corps was really kind of the old boys club. It was all white Anglo-Saxon male. They all come out of test pilot school.
For the shuttle program, this was a new vehicle that allowed new kinds of work, which meant that they wanted not only pilot astronauts, but mission specialists, people with PhDs, medical degrees, researchers who would be doing the experiments on the vehicle. And NASA, when they started looking into the application pile, realized that they were dealing with a legacy of historic discrimination.
They were not getting the response that they wanted. And they said this was already 8 months underway, and they only had 4 more months. And they said, we're not going to have any black people. We're not going to have any women because no one's responding. Why? And I said, we don't believe you.
During the 60s, to be able to ride and take a seat on a bus, any place on a bus, we would be beaten, arrested, and jailed.
I can remember the days of blatant racism and going into the drugstore one day and buying an ice cream cone and a comic book. And the lady came out from behind the counter and said, you can't sit here, you have to get up and leave. I remember just turning around to walk out of the store, and she yelled at me, that's the best thing you could do, just get out of here.
Walking into the Naval Academy, a place where I had wanted so badly to go from 7th grade when I first saw the program, Men of Annapolis, and getting in there in plebe summer, calling home, crying to my mom and dad, saying, I made a big mistake. I want to come home. And they would ask me all the time, I said, but you've always wanted to go here. I said, yeah, but they don't want me here, and I don't want to be here. Those are the kinds of things that I remember.
I applied to NASA 4 different times, to be turned down 4 different times, because NASA reorganized their nomenclature, so to speak, that you had to have jet test pilot time. This was impossible for a girl to have in those days. Now let's go back to the men, the Mercury. There were 159 men selected from the armed services to go through these tests at Loveless. How many passed? 7. 25 women were selected, and how many passed? 13. We could have done it if they would just let us.
They said, how can we get people to apply? How can we correct that? And I said, I think you need to get someone immediately with credibility and high visibility, whom they would believe when they speak. They know that they would not talk to them if NASA was not serious. And NASA said, how about Lieutenant Uhura? And I just laughed because I said, no, people might think it's a gimmick.
Oh, I said, don't, not me, they'll laugh at you. And they said, not if they hear you speak 5 minutes.
One of the things that Nichelle was very keen on is she did not want to be seen as like an assistant or a mascot of NASA. She didn't want NASA people around her when she was out there recruiting.
I cannot have a NASA representative taking me around and propping me up with a prepared speech. I won't do that. I said, I will accept it, but I'll do it under my company, Women in Motion, and I'll be your PI. Women in Motion was a company that I began when I wanted to make a difference.
It became the vehicle for this NASA contract.
And I said, I will bring you so many qualified people, you will have no choice. And if I have done my work, and it's still an all-white male astronaut corps, I will be your worst nightmare because I will file a class action lawsuit against you. I will go and speak before Congress, and I will expose what I have done. And Dr. Fletcher gave me his hand, and he said, and I'll go with you. And John Yardley said, and so shall I.
And on that basis, for the next 4 months, because we only had 4 months left, I completely stopped my career, canceled all engagements, and set up a grueling schedule.
There was a good old boy attitude within NASA that we know what's best and we'll do the hiring, thank you very much.
Some of them shared with me the fact that, when this Hollywood star walked in, they really were not inclined to initially take it seriously until they started talking to her.
I needed some astronaut training to know what I was talking about to astronauts, And when I said that first to them, they kind of went like...
Astronaut Alan Dean has agreed to show me some of the training and evaluation that new astronaut candidates will be undergoing.
Why don't you take the commander's seat over there? Right. You can have the
I get to be a captain at last.
She was able to land this space shuttle orbiter simulator. Later on, I said, how did you do that? Oh, it wasn't me. It was Uhura that did it.
Credibility, of course, in the minority community has been very low. I'm sure
NASA's credibility?
NASA's credibility. How do you feel about...
well, first, I'm kind of...
a woman coming on board.
I think that's a good idea. But I think if they think they got any kind of chance, they should apply.
I think the problem is that most people just don't think it means them this time.
It does mean them.
Once she got NASA to accept the fact that they needed to have people of color, she faced the battle of going out and convincing qualified young men and women of color that they would find a place, a welcome place, if they chose to apply.
I went to every university that I could get to. I went to every woman's organization every professional science organization of black engineers and scientists. I went to LULAC, I went to the Asian community, I went to the Spanish American community, I went to the black community, I went to the Organization of Black Pilots, and fortunately, many of these people were having their annual conventions at that time, and many had admitted they allowed me to come because I was Uhura, but they finished up because I was Nichelle Nichols speaking for our space program.
I think that's the perseverance that Nichelle showed in going around, being willing to go into the Deep South and try to recruit.
I went to a university where they were livid with me. They wanted to hurt me, and they told me that. And I said, that's fine. I said, let's stay civil. But I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to find that one person who'll take a chance. Many of them said, NASA's using you, Miss Nichols. And I said, I know, and I'm using them. Now I want to use you.
Nichelle's personal mission was to help these people understand that NASA needed them.
Hello, this is Nichelle Nichols. NASA needs astronaut pilots and mission specialists for the space shuttle that becomes operational in the 1980s.
These people wrote me and said they would have never thought they qualified until they heard me speak or saw me on television.
In every city that I visited, we contacted the media. I went on every talk show.
And I'd go on and they'd want to talk about my career, and I said, thank you so much, because my career is so important to me. It has taken an incredible turn. Oh, what are you doing now? I'm helping NASA recruit the first women and minority astronauts for the Space Shuttle program. And they'd go, ha, ha, ha. I said, no, it's not funny, it's true.
Even the network stations, many of them played my public service announcements in prime time because they had Uhura, you know.
Nichelle Nichols came on TV one day, and I'm just sitting there watching her, and she was in a blue flight suit.
Hi, I'm Nichelle Nichols.
And she pointed at me and she said, I want you to join the astronaut program.
This is your NASA.
And immediately, I knew she was talking to me. Other people have claimed she was talking to them. No, she was talking to me.
When various men and women heard me on a television talk show in which I spoke about the military recruitment and the civilian recruitment. You see, the military had their own recruitment drive for NASA and eliminated people and then gave NASA their selection. They invited me to the Pentagon when I first took on the contract to let me know they didn't want me interfering with the military recruitment. They didn't want me out recruiting military, so I didn't.
They made it quite clear to her that they had their ways of picking astronauts and they wanted her to stay out of their way. But she found a loophole.
Just as I was about to leave, I said, oh, if you have your own recruitment and your own selection, what about the men and women who aren't selected by you? Would they be able to apply directly to NASA as American citizens? And they went, yes. So everywhere I went, I simply talked about that.
And Fred kind of pulled an end run and applied through NASA as a civilian.
And I got a call from General Tom Stafford. And I remember the first words he said, who the hell are you? And I said, well, sir, I'm Major Fred Gregory. I never met the man in life. He said, well, why did you apply as a civilian? I said, because if I had been in the Air Force and on the selection committee, I probably would not have selected me because I was an unknown. He says, well, that's all I wanted to know. And that was the end of the conversation.
Fun, huh?
During the recruitment process, NASA Public Affairs pulled out all the stops trying to get Nichelle exposure. And the crown jewel of that was an appearance on Good Morning America.
Recently, I had an opportunity to do something that very few people get the chance to do. A week or so ago, I visited the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And one of the people that I met there was Nichelle Nichols, a star of the television series Star Trek. Over the last few years, Ms. Nichols has gone from science fiction to science fact. Why did you choose to become involved in the NASA space program?
Well, Sandy, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine and I formed a company called Women in Motion. And all of the things that I had talked with them about the potential, they included about why women should apply, why minorities should apply. I think it's very important that at this selection for astronaut status of having a woman astronaut and a completely integrated astronaut corps. The old Star Trek IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
And June 30th is the last day for women and other minorities to apply for the program.
I was sitting in my office at NASA and I got a call from Nichelle. And she said, Gary, I just found out we're supposed to do a final report. What is a final report? So I said, when is this due? She said, in a week. I said, okay. She said, can you come and help? I said, sure. This was an era of typewriters and Xerox machines. So we were literally having to type the report and take all the photographs and the documents, and they weren't in emails where you could cut and paste them. You actually had to physically Xerox them and stack them. It was very labor intensive. I could tell that she was driving really, really hard. She was doing media constantly. She was traveling constantly. She was doing presentations constantly. It was an incredible grind. I went to sleep at 2 in the morning. She got me up at 5, took me to the airport, and I was back at my desk at 8. I realized from a historical perspective, this was going to be important. They finished it, they got it in. I think she didn't know how it would turn out at that point.
I was a kid out of the inner city of Philadelphia, Air Force officer who wanted to be an aerospace engineer. January of '78, I was driving to work and I heard on the radio that NASA had selected 35 astronauts. I was curious at who those people were, you know.
I was a pilot and enjoyed flying airplanes a lot. And that's the reason I was interested in the space shuttle program, because it had a wing on it.
So I got to work and was probably in the office maybe an hour or so when I got this call from the strange guy.
And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, this is the call. So Mr. Abbey gets on the phone, he says, Fred? I said, yes, sir. He says, you still interested in this job down here? I said, yes. Yes. He says, you've been selected to be in this first class, but you can't tell anybody until noon. And this was like 7:30 in the morning. I think I kept my word for 5 minutes. And
One day on television, it came on as news.
Were ultimately chosen to become astronauts.
They mentioned my name, and my son came running to me and said, Mom, come quick, your people are on television. And I said, what? I think he's talking about my TV show. And I says, of course we're on TV, darling. He says, no. Your people that go up. And I came running and I saw, and there they were. Well, this might sound a little corny, but it felt like my children. And my heart, it pounded. And I knew The world will never be the same again. We would go on to great heights. And to think that I had the slightest thing to do with it makes me know that all things good are possible.
In '78, we got together for the first time in February of '78.
When I saw the picture of us, to me that looked like a very representative group of Americans. And so from my point of view, I saw brothers and sisters up there on that platform.
We had 6 women. I got to meet Fred Gregory, and I got to meet Ron McNair.
Ron was actually impressed and encouraged to come into the space program due to the work that Nichelle did in traveling around the country trying to help recruit for NASA. The difference that Nichelle played was the fact that she helped to make it real, to make it a true possibility for him.
Times have changed to the point where a black man can enter areas that were heretofore some sort of, you might say, prohibited.
Do you feel that 3 is an adequate number at this point in time?
Well, certainly I don't feel 3 is adequate. I think as many as can get in, but 3 is a start. Let's do it.
The first United States space shuttle, which was rolled out today from Palmdale, California, in the Mojave Desert.
President Ford may indeed be a fan of the show Star Trek. When he was asked to approve the name of the first American space shuttlecraft, the president chose the name the Enterprise.
That was the first time the crew was actually sort of featured along with NASA in a public story.
We were absolutely thrilled. There was the band there, and they started to play a tune. It was the opening tune from the Star Trek TV series.
And around a corner, a truck came into view, and it was towing this huge, enormous thing that I had never seen the likes of which before. And across the nose of the ship, it said Enterprise. And we just burst into cheers. I think we came close to tears, actually.
It was an exciting and deeply, profoundly moving experience for us.
We felt, my goodness, we really are a part of something that is real, that is important, that is not science fiction alone.
You're coming. Doors open and they're all down, coming down. Look down here. 2 feet. You're going off about 2 feet. You're on, you're on. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's great.
I was part of the launch team for the first launch.
Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. The doors are 1 for main engine start.
We were all used to Saturns, and I can remember when the shuttle came out of the cloud for the first time. It was so short and stubby that I thought maybe the real one was going to come back up and come out later.
And after we got through maybe STS-2 or 3, there was a lot of pressure going on as to when are you going to fly the first woman in space.
Well, you helped bring the women into the program then. How do you feel they're going to do in this man's world?
I think it's not a man's world.
The 6 women astronauts chosen were Dr. Sally Ride, Dr. Judith Resnick, Dr. Kathy Sullivan, Anna Fisher, Ray Sutton, and Dr. Shannon Lucid.
I want to get up as soon as I can. So that means that I'd like to be the first woman up.
How does it feel to realize that you are going to become a footnote in history and a trivia question subject forever?
Gosh, that's quite an honor. I have to admit, not prepared for all the attention that I received. Please welcome Sally Ride.
Sally Ride's flight aboard STS-7 in 1983 was a moment where there were people lined up across Florida highways and around the Kennedy Space Center with signs that said, "Ride, Sally, ride."
John Young, head of the astronaut office, came up and said, "Hey, George wants to talk to you. Go over to his office at 10:30. I sort of said to myself, oh, I wonder what I did wrong, you know. And we were waiting outside of his office, and we all came in and we sat down around his table. And George said in a very humbling way, you know, I need somebody to fly on STS-8. You guys want to fly for STS-8? Yeah!
The flights of those as the first were both moments of extraordinary pressure on the individual who had the burden and the opportunity of being the first to do something so significant. But they were also, I think, met with a lot of public enthusiasm.
Well, one, I was pleased to be selected to fly on STS-8 and to recognize that I would be opening the doors for other African Americans who would be flying in space.
Challenger, the president is on the line.
Guy, congratulations. You, I think, are paving the way for many others, and you're making it plain that we are in an era of brotherhood. I can't help but express my gratitude.
The press loved it. Well, what's it feel like being the only? Well, what's it feel like starting or breaking the glass barrier? You could not have found a better selected group.
My sister Judy Resnick was a scientist and found the ultimate job as an astronaut, being the second American woman to go into space. Nichelle should be proud of what she did and her part in recruiting Judy and others, because she gave them the opportunity to do exactly what they wanted to do.
The importance and the historical significance of Nichelle's efforts with NASA is probably best summarized by the moment where she is given the Public Service Award.
It was Judy that actually presented the medal to Nichelle, and she and Judy were close, and she always appreciated the fact that they had stayed close after the recruitment.
When I got in the orbiter and the Challenger for my first mission, I went in there actually pretty cocky. I would say that we were 90 to 95% aware of what it was that we were going to see and experience, but they left out the 5% or 10%, and that was the actual experience. When the main engine started and you looked out the window and the orbiter tipped, we called it a twang. And when it came back in zero and the solids ignited, there was no doubt you were going someplace really fast. And it shook and rattled, and I said it was something like a old wooden roller coaster. And by this time we are screaming. At 2 minutes after liftoff, those solid rockets have burnt all of their fuel, and they are blown away from the tank. and you see the flash through the windows, and suddenly that rattle, that shake, rattle, and roll, goes into just a very like an electric motor. Now you're accelerating, but you just begin to feel it in your chest, and it just gets more and more. At about a minute or so before main engine cutoff, or when you've reached orbital velocity, you have a steady 3 Gs, and everybody is going, At about 8.5 minutes, which is all the time it takes to get to space, main engine's cut off. And you go immediately from 3 Gs to 0 Gs. And your arms just float up like this, and any debris just floats around like this. And then you're in space, and you look out the window for the first time, and you see the Earth beneath you, and this beautiful blue marble. You go around the world in an hour and a half, every 90 minutes. Your whole concept of neighbors changes. A neighbor that you walk to might take 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, you're across the Atlantic Ocean. Your concept of who a friend is, an enemy, your concept of faith, all of these things change when you have a privilege and honor to do something like that. And from the political point of view, I wish we could send politicians up there and they realize that, what we're talking about is people in the world down here as opposed to factions of this. And I think it would have fantastic influence on them as they make decisions. It don't make sense when you look at it from the space point. So this is just my first, my first 5 minutes on my first mission. It just makes you come home and just go, wow.
By the time we flew the 24th flight of the space shuttle, Charlie, Franklin, and I were the rookies on that flight.
Florida Congressman Bill Nelson is the second congressional observer to fly on the shuttle.
It so happened that our Capcom was Fred Gregory. So after 4 tries to get off the ground, 4 scrubs over the better part of a month, the first time that 2 shuttles were on the pad, on the 5th try, we launch. 8.5 minutes later, we're in space. The first words coming from Fred Gregory was, "Welcome to space, rookies." It's now just 10 days after we've returned to Earth. A Challenger has been sitting on the other pad because we were so late getting off the pad with all of those scrubs.
It was a cold day, end of January. I was the lead Capcom. All of the Capcoms worked for me.
I had a friend had come into town, was staying at my house, and I had gone for my morning walk.
Countdown going very smoothly here at the Kennedy Space Center. All of the crew members are on board the Orbiter Challenger now. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger lifted off, everything looked great. After the 10-second rise, the orbiter rolls over on its back and begins this trip out over the Atlantic Ocean. And the commander of the mission will say, "Roll program, Houston." And the Capcom will say, "Roger, roll." So that's the first conversation that occurs between Mission Control in Houston and the orbiter. And then the next thing that occurs is, as we go through the speed of sound Mach 1, the main engines throttle back. But then when we get through Mach 1, we go back to 100% and it's throttle up.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
And it was right after that, at 71 seconds, that suddenly it disappeared.
carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
It was like part of your family, hearing something happen to a member of your family. And we have to deal with it. Judy Resnick was I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Want to take a little break, Nichelle?
I was thinking, yes, but we owe to Judy Resnick and her like kind the blessing that God meant for her to have. I can't do it, I'm sorry.
Stop.
Everybody was gone. It's still tough. And I said to myself, why were we spared? Because we had been through so many near misses.
And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly.
3 of her recruits, Ron McNair, Ellison Alazuko, and Judith Resnick, all passed away in that one mission. And that was a very painful experience for her at that point.
It caught everybody such by surprise that it really kind of shook your faith in human nature a little bit, in your ability to actually do the things and command the things and master the things that you had to do for spaceflight.
Okay, everybody, start pulling it together.
Because you think about your friends, you know, I think about the conversation that I had with my friend Ron about, hey, we're going to form a business together. And I used to jokingly say, well, would it be Phillips McNair or would it be McNair Phillips? So who's the most important? You know, we used to joke about that. But I knew Ron's family, and you think, wow, you multiply that sense of loss over the number of families that were affected. When there are people involved, it gets tough.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the Vice President, Mr. Bush.
When George Bush came to visit us in the crew quarters.
Thank you very much, and I'm now going to go and pay my respects to the families.
My mom stepped forward and just said, please don't let this end the space program, because this meant so much to our loved ones. Please keep going.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue.
There's a progression of shock and grief immediately. And you have to get through that before you get on with, okay, we're going to fix it and get on with the program.
I was privileged to have an opportunity to go over to the safety division at the Johnson Space Center and become the director of safety. And my primary responsibility was to oversee the return to flight from a safety perspective. And so that became my charge for the next 2 years after the accident.
I made a commitment to the people on the Challenger that I would, stay there to make sure that we returned to flight.
I always have optimism because I always know that if something is not right, you can change it.
Let's not kid ourselves that there is no potential danger in this. Do you wish that the first Apollo mission hadn't reached the moon, or that we hadn't gone on to Mars and then to the nearest star? Dr. McCoy is right in pointing out the enormous danger potential. But I must point out that the possibilities, the potential for knowledge and advancement is equally great. Risk is our business. That's what the Starship is all about.
We are confident we will launch and come back safely. But there are no guarantees associated with that, and there can't be. The only way you can guarantee that much safety is to never launch.
We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1.
Up here where the blue sky turns to black, we can say at long last, dear friends, your spirit and your dream are still alive in our hearts.
It sure does feel good to see the Challenger mission continue and America back in space.
Children, this is the Air and Space Museum. Now, have a good time and use your imagination.
Have always been involved with young people, and I've always been invited to talk to young people about stay in school and this kind of thing. Suddenly I had something wonderful to talk to them about, their future.
Ms. Nichols has kept up over especially the last 10 or 20 years a busy and active schedule of outreach, and she has had a wonderful relationship with NASA.
I'm Nichelle Nichols. I'm Nichelle Nichols. I'm Nichelle Nichols. I'm Nichelle Nichols. I'm Nichelle Nichols.
I've actually spent a lot of time studying the evolution of science education in the United States after Sputnik, and to find out that Nichelle Nichols actually formed one of the early companies, was the first woman to run a STEM education company like that in an era when there were so many things going on to transform STEM education in the United States. That was a great shock to me.
Just me. No. This is about you. Let's just talk about what you've done for women.
Well, I can tell you a little story. The director of Johnson Space Center called me up to his office, told me I was going to be the first woman space shuttle commander. The reason I'm talking to you is the First Lady of the United States would like to announce your mission at the White House on Monday, which was 3 days away. Make some remarks from the White House. So,
in December 1998, when the shuttle Columbia takes off, Colonel Eileen Collins will take one big step forward for women and one giant leap for humanity.
Dr. Mae Jemison, the first woman African-American to become an astronaut, directly credits Nichelle Nichols' campaign with her decision to become an astronaut.
I was very much a Star Trek fan, and then to finish the whole story off and go full circle, I appeared on Star Trek.
Phase distortion is dropping. The next transport window opens in 42
I
seconds.
admired her so much, and we fortunately became very, very good friends and still are today.
My mom and dad told me one day, you too can be president of the United States. I knew that was crap, because I hadn't seen a black president, And it was sort of like, okay, yeah, right. I would have said, no way in the world. I'm going to be an astronaut. No way in the world. I will end up being the NASA administrator, appointed by a black president of the United States.
Who turned out to be a fan. So it wasn't me trying to meet the president. The president said, I'm in a position to meet anybody I want. I want to meet Nichelle Nichols. And I was like, oh my God. It was wonderful.
I hope that people continue to thank Ms. Nichols for helping African Americans and for helping women in their pursuits of what we would now call STEM fields.
STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's a convenient moniker for something that is vital to the future of the human race overall.
Having men, women, different ethnicities, all as astronauts, and hearing about their journeys going to space really made an impact on me as a little girl, and really taught me that it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, or what race you are, anyone can go to space. Space is for everyone.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that NASA has selected America's next generation of space explorers.
Today, astronaut classes are more equally balanced, and they include both women and men, much like the diversity on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise.
I was at the last launching of the space shuttle. It's like visiting family. They know you, you know them. You don't see your family all the time. Being at a launch is like the rarest thing that you can think of that you would enjoy the most.
2, 1, 0, and liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis. Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time.
I have been with Shuttle from almost its very first day. And I can remember sitting with her a few times, sharing tears as we recognized the fact that we were about to bring down the curtain on something that had been absolutely incredible in fulfilling a dream that she had for making space available for all people.
Piercing the pre-dawn sky as the space shuttle announces its arrival at the launch site with its signature sound of twin sonic booms. The space shuttle pulls into port for the last time. Its voyage at an end.
Everybody thinks about the space shuttle as this incredible feat of technology. I believe that the shuttle's legacy forever will be the fact that it opened up the world of space exploration the way that I don't think many of us, short of Nichelle Nichols, had dreamed.
The space program will go on and on and on because our space program is our future. We haven't even begun to begin.
It's very easy to look along a path that someone else has taken. That's a very different thing when you're trying to do it alone the very first time. Without people like Nichelle Nichols, a lot of us would not have been able to follow those extraordinary footsteps.
We can come together and build what Dr. King called the beloved community. Because we're one people, we're one family. We all must learn to live together on this little piece of real estate we call Earth, on this little planet.
I think in the not too distant future, things are really, really, really going to change.
What is a change in society? A change is you cannot even imagine a world any other way. That's when you know you've really changed.
Human mind power and the best of the best is essential to the exploration of space.
Spaceflight is for philosophical reasons. It's for answering the big questions. It's what's out there. And what is humanity's place there?
Space is not the final frontier. The final frontier is the human soul. Space is where we can meet the challenge.
That's the mission. It's up to the greatness in us, mindful of our fallibility, and with knowledge of that fallibility, try to prepare for those issues to come up as we push forward, boldly go where no one has gone before.
This is your NASA, a space agency embarked on a mission to improve the quality of life on planet Earth right now.
What a public service Nichelle rendered for this country.
It is so inspiring for our sons and daughters to learn from the examples of Nichelle Nichols as a testament as to what one person can do when they believe in the spirit of diversity and the betterment for all of our children.
All I can do is think of Nichelle Nichols as a force of nature unto herself.
Nichelle Nichols, Lieutenant Uhura, has and will always be a woman in motion.
She went into it to be an actress. She ended up changing the world.
Long before they hired me, I said, if they let me in the door, I will open it so wide they will see the world.
And to know that I had really touched the future by changing the present, by just believing and being me, and saying we have lifted off and will never be earthbound again. And suddenly there I was, doing exactly what I fantasized. It became a reality.
Woo, good.
Nichelle Nichols, Fly Me to the Moon.
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Yeah.
I'm gonna have you sing me to sleep tonight.
Okay.